I think in terms of compliance, some of the things that we built in to the legislation, but we're going to have to go back and take another look at is, look, if you don't comply with this, then your department will lose funding, right? And so that's some of what we thought of. And we may have to go back and rethink that and see what's happening, but that's huge. So I would think certain departments would want to comply for fear of losing funding.
Thank you so much. Ms. Emanuel, I see you shaking your head. Would you like to piggyback off of Delegate Atterbury?
I think an accountability piece to the bill certainly will hopefully help with the compliance. So I think I'm happy to hear that that's something that's being considered, and would definitely look forward to supporting in any way that we can with that.
Thank you. All right, Deputy Chief Polinsky, I don't want to leave you out. Any comment on that question? You're on mute. The famous phrase.
No, I thought Delegate Atterbury did a great job of just hitting a lot of the highlights in this. This is the PowerPoint that we use to instruct our officers on the new changes and bills and all that. It was very extensive, and we were, I think, policing was the focus of the last session, and it was an emotional period. And I think that there were a lot of attempts to correct policing. And I don't think, most progressive police departments are going to be opposed to that. I think that we want our profession to be better. I think that we're not, I'll be the first one to say we're not perfect, and there's room for improvement, and we should be striving for that. I do think that there was a tendency to demonize the entire profession over the course of the last year, and that I don't believe that's helpful. That's not helpful in recruiting and retaining the kind of police officers that you want to serve your community. And it's been a struggle for my agency, for other departments to hire and recruit, and we're grateful for additional funding or incentives to bring officers into the profession, because the reality of it is we are needed, and we want to be better. So like if you had a problem with education, the last thing you would do would be cut funding from education. If you had a problem with low-income housing, you wouldn't take money away from it. If you want well-trained and high-performing police officers, there's a cost to that. And and I'm glad to see that some of those issues were addressed in there. Now, it's very early. Most of the changes have not been implemented yet. So I would say we're cautiously optimistic that this will help. I think that there are tweaks that could be made to a lot of these. And I don't question the intentions of any of the politicians who are behind these, but I think that there are things that could make them some of these bills more effective, better for everybody involved.
Thank you for that insight, Deputy Chief Polinsky. It's nice to see, training is underway. Thank you for sharing, because like you said, we've all experienced that, where we've had to make some adjustments and improvements, and we all have that training book, and we all got to pull it together. So with that, we're going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to move on to you, Ms. Emanuel. So a recent article we read was interesting. This is a quote from that article, and this is a quote from you. While we do believe that this is progress in the right direction, there is still going to be a lot of work to be done to truly ensure that officers will be held accountable for misconduct. So, Ms. Emanuel, can you elaborate?
Yes, I can. And first, I just wanted to say thank you to Delegate Atterbury for introducing a bill to remove school resource officers out of Howard County schools. That is an extremely important issue, and I'm happy that she took that up, because it was a struggle to move that bill through last session, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to bring that back and expand to other jurisdictions as well. But as I understand it, it's going to be reintroduced again, so we look forward to supporting that this session. But before I go into kind of the question, I kind of want to give just an overview of the history behind the reason why we took the approach that we took last session. So I think it's really critical to first kind of set the ground as to why we emphasize that there's more work that could be done. I think that there definitely was progress and it's headed to the, in the right direction, but how we measured the bills last session was really looking at historically what have communities been advocating for and how far have we come since then. So if you look back at the 60s and 70s and the urban rebellions that happened then, a lot of them were in response to police brutality that was happening in those communities. And the demand, both from groups like the Black Panther Party to the NAACP, was emphasizing that community control over police. And that includes both the investigation, imposing discipline and adjudication of discipline. And so the reason why so many groups, especially in our coalition, were so supportive of our demand to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights is because for decades, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights has been an impediment to establishing community control over police. Specifically, Section 3-104B of the bill, of the statute, prohibits any investigation conducted by non-sworn law enforcement officers from ending in any kind of discipline. And then the trial board still has the final decision-making power that also stands in the way of external oversight bodies having that final decision-making power. So for a lot of reasons, communities who, especially those who have been directly impacted by police violence, understand that they want, and Black people in general, want to have power over the institutions that govern our lives. And policing is a big one. And so the demand, again, this year, this last session, was the same demands that folks like Juanita Jackson from the Baltimore NAACP to Walter P. Carter all demanded back in the 60s. And there were still demands that we were asking for last session because the issues have persistently and consistently been the same. And that's communities being abused and a lack of accountability and control over those institutions. So the bills that passed last year, particularly one of the positives about the police accountability boards is it does appoint the majority of the administrative charging committee, which is, I think, a good step, but that is still an entity that lives within the internal policing process and is not external and something that community actually owns. So, which is why we said that while what passed allows for greater transparency on the back end, that internal process is still going to be, can be something that is secret because it is still IA that's conducting those investigations. That's something that's not necessarily going to be unless they're sustained, it's not going to really be transparent unless with the MPIA, which we're already seeing some kind of difficulties accessing those records with. So a step in the right direction, but still some more work to do. And then I think this might come up in another question, but implementation is also key. So we're seeing in Calvert County, there are attempts to put former police officers on these police accountability boards, mostly former police officers and military, including background checks. And so other little requirements to make sure that, to essentially form a pro-police board. So the implementation and the organizing around it is really key. And it's something our coalition has been following and trying to organize across the state with. But again, is a step, but still has some more work to go. And that was, I think, the floor. And it just went just right beneath the floor, but definitely better than what we've seen in the past, for sure.
That's awesome. A step in the right direction, but we still have work to do. And any process is a work in progress. And implementation, I like that what you said, implementation is the key. When we put the action behind the words that's on the paper. So thank you so much, Ms. Emanuel. All right, Deputy Chief Polinsky. Your turn. Make sure you get off mute.
Yeah, I'm off mute, and again, I think any good police department's going to want to be able to hold their officers accountable. The only people that hate bad cops more than the residents are good cops. And like I said, I've participated in recommending officers for termination, and I've sat on boards that have terminated officers. I take no joy in that, but I also respect the fact and know that my obligation is not only to the police department and the integrity of that agency, but also to the people that we serve. So removing those folks from police departments is an important part of police leadership, and we should do that. As far as the accountability boards go, I do not believe military folks or retired police officers should be excluded from them. Those are members of the community as well. I think that we shouldn't be looking for pro-police boards or anti-police boards. I think that you should have a place where people get a fair hearing, so that police officers who are wrongly accused get a fair shake, as well as officers who are wrong and deserving of punishment are given that. So that's where I stand on that. And was there another question, or was I just
Yeah,
commenting?
but no, I'm so glad that you were able to provide your insight also. So the question that I have for you right now, so can you share your thoughts on the changes enacted due to the policing bills that were passed in the General Assembly? And over to you, Deputy Chief.
Yeah, like I said, we jokingly say the only two things that officers hate are, the way things are and change. So inevitably, you've got to deal with it, and you've got to roll and implement those changes in. One of the concerns we have, and we look at it, discipline, as I mentioned, it's important to be effective at that. And one of our concerns we have with the accountability boards is, especially now, I work in, each county is going to have one accountability board. As a municipality, we're concerned that maybe Prince George's County will get the attention from that board. I believe the board members are going to be volunteers, and in Prince George's County, not only do we have probably 20 different police departments. So, and we generate discipline. I mean, discipline is not a monthly thing for any police department. It's something that you're addressing on, a daily or weekly basis. So our concern is that we might fall to the bottom of the line, or not be addressed in a relatively quick fashion, which is the best way to discipline somebody. If behavior's wrong, you want to correct it, and you want to move on from there. So that would be my concern with the accountability board.
Okay, so thank you so much for your perspective and for elaborating. So with that said, the police reform measure includes some much needed standards, such as body-worn cameras, mental health counseling for officers, and disciplining officers when warranted. But when the public pressure is off, there seems to be a tendency to backslide a little bit. So what standards, Deputy Chief, will also be included so that officers are fit for policing?
I think Miss Emanuel had a comment on what I said. I don't know if she wants to go.
I just wanted to clarify that the Police Accountability Board is only tasked with receiving complaints and reviewing them. They're not actually conducting the investigations or determining discipline. So that's the Administrative Charging Committee's role. So this Police Accountability Board should be all civilians, because those are the ones who are going to be directly impacted by the policing that's happening. And as far as the board being equipped, I think that matters. That's why there's a budget mandate in there. So how it's, how much money they receive, the proper staffing, all of that will go into how effective and how the board will be able to function. But additionally, Prince George's County already has a civilian oversight board, which is the civilian oversight panel, which is first enacted in 1990. And so they've had this function already, but they haven't been properly staffed or funded. So they haven't been able to be as effective as they could be. And so the hope is that with these police accountability boards and the new mandates and responsibilities that they have, that the CCOP, or even if it's the police accountability board separately, will be able to function and be able to receive and properly review all of the complaints that they'll be receiving.
Thank you, Ms. Emanuel.
And to go back, to go back to your question, the Laurel Police Department was the first department in the state of Maryland to go to body-worn cameras. When I was with Montgomery County, we implemented the body-worn camera program over there. I think it's wonderful that the great thing about body-worn cameras is it's really made investigating allegations of misconduct much simpler. You get the complaint, you pull the body-worn camera, you watch, you see the behavior of the officer, and the body-worn camera footage is either going to exonerate them, or it's going to show that you have some work to do and that you need to either address the performance with training or discipline. I know you spoke about accountability and discipline. It should be effective, should be happen in an expedited manner. I think that there's I see some of the stories in the news as well. I think Delegate Atterbury addressed some of them where you see some of these officers and you're shocked by, by what's in their past. And again, I don't want to work with people who don't treat people with dignity or respect, or have malice in their heart. And officers make mistakes. They're human. They're fallible. They're going to be they operate in very high tense situations. If it's a mistake of the head, that's something that we can correct, hopefully through training or through progressive discipline. If it's a mistake of the heart, then maybe they need to find a better career. There's just like any other field, there's bad attorneys, there's bad teachers, bad dentists, and there are bad police officers. Our goal should be to hire the right people, and we have a robust way that we screen them. There's interviews, polygraphs, background investigations, and physical and psychological tests to do that. Some of the things that that officers do change them over the course of their career. I think the average number of traumatic events a citizen or resident or civilian are going to go through is 2 to 3. Your average officer during the course of a 20-year career is going to see 188 traumatic events. It makes them more vulnerable to post-traumatic stress disorder. It changes, some of the way they view instances and all that. And we should be aware for that. One of the things we use here at Laurel, and I know many agencies in the state use, is IA Pro, which has an early warning system where if we see the number of calls an officer's running and we monitor the times they use force, the number of pursuits they're involved in, the complaints they generate, and all that. We have certain triggers to where, at some point we'll sit down with the supervisor and say, we need to come up with a plan for this officer. And part of that plan is random checks of their body-worn camera footage, their interactions with residents and all that. And I think that we should be looking for that stuff, because a lot of times, officers can be salvaged by good supervision and brought back from bad things. And we, as a police leader, I feel we have an obligation for what we send these young men and women out into as police officers, and the things that they have to deal with, that we should have some of the services that Delegate Atterbury talked about in I think it was 620, where the psychological services are available to police officers.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Deputy Chief Polinsky. Would anyone else like to elaborate, Delegate Atterbury or Mr. Manuel?
Yes, thank you. I just want to comment on, what are the next steps, or where do we go from here? And I do think that there is, of course, much left to do, but I do think this was not a step. I think this was a giant leap for the state of Maryland in terms of where we were. I think that, in the pieces of legislation, there are real repercussions for departments and police officers who don't comply with the mandates that are in the statute, like, as I mentioned, the loss of funding. We instituted criminal penalties for officers. An officer can be suspended without pay by their chiefs if they engage in certain disqualifying crimes, in fraud, theft, or other incidents involving veracity. They can be terminated immediately by their chief if they engage in a felony or second-degree assault. And these are things, unfortunately, that we've seen and that chiefs have not been able to do because of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. We put in the legislation, look, officers cannot negotiate, unions cannot negotiate for disciplinary outcomes anymore. So once the contracts expire, they can negotiate for things that other folks negotiate for, pay, health benefits, and the like, but not disciplinary outcomes. I do think, and this is the one point where I think the legislature and the ACLU did disagree just a little bit, is that I think the police accountability boards have significant citizen input. The chair is a civilian. on the charging committee, you have 2 civilians and 4 civilians, 2 appointed by the county exec and the chair of the police accountability board and 2 other civilians. And so the charging committee receives the investigation by the police department, the internal investigation, which is done after a citizen files a complaint. And it's the charging committee, so it's 4 citizens who are going to decide, should this officer be charged administratively? So this is not a criminal charge. This is an administrative disciplinary measure. Should they be charged based on their action or not? And if the 4 citizens say yes, then it moves on down the process. The police accountability board, the legislator thought was a great thing. We didn't prescribe who should be on it. We did leave that up to the local jurisdictions. It's interesting, and I understand the deputy chief's concerns, and we actually thought about specifically Prince George's County, Montgomery County, that do have all these municipalities. But we thought if we were too prescriptive, quite frankly, then we would get complaints back. So the thought was that, look, your local county council will pass legislation that deals with just that. And one suggestion that I have told individuals and other members from Prince George's County is, look, hopefully you can work with your county council and they can pass legislation that says, if the incident happens in Bowie, then there'll be a representative of Bowie on the police accountability board for that incident. And so there can be that type of interchanging for the localities, but not every jurisdiction has localities, like Howard County doesn't. So we did not put that in the legislation, since it wasn't, the whole state doesn't experience that. But that is, I just want the deputy chief to know that is something we did think about, and hopefully the county council there in Prince George's will work with the members from the General Assembly and others like yourselves to figure that out.
Thank you, Delegate Atterbury. Ms. Emanuel, do you have any comment on what either one of the other panelists said?
Well, the only thing I would just add is that I think it really does come down to the different perspectives. I think if we compare the bills to what has passed in the past, absolutely, it's a huge step forward. But when we look at it from the perspective of what is racial justice and what have communities that have been impacted been demanding for decades, that's when we have a difference in perspective. So communities are asking for, and racial justice means that the communities, especially those Black communities, have the control over the institutions that govern them. So this process has civilians who are plugged into the internal process, but the charging committee is still dependent on IA's investigation. So it is IA who conducts the investigation, and then it's turned over to the charging committee. Then the charging committee then reviews it, and then can decide to whether or not to discipline an officer. If the officer is disciplined, it goes to the chief. The chief can go above or below the matrix, and then they can offer that punishment to the officer. And then the trial board. They cannot go below. They can only go above. Yes, I'm sorry. They can only go above the matrix. But then the officer can either accept the discipline or reject the discipline, and or appeal to a trial board. And then that trial board is 1 civilian appointed by the police accountability board, 1 administrative law judge, and a police officer. And the trial board still has the final say and could overturn the decision of the charging committee. We wanted an external process that is completely independent of the police department, that could do its own investigations and have the power to impose discipline without the trial board being able to overturn it. That citizen's decision would be final. So that would be a separate entity that the community was accountable to the community, and it was independent and had control over that discipline process. So that's what the two differ, but I think there is a way that these boards could grow into those oversight boards over time, if that's what those jurisdictions, if that's what they wish to do. But that's what I think the real difference is, and where I think that perspective came in. But I do think that the House particularly did make a genuine effort into trying to meet us there, but it just came down to really what is the difference between civilians being plugged into a process versus an entity that they controlled and owned that was independent.
Thank you, Ms. Emanuel. So Deputy Chief Polinsky, I'm going to ask a question, and you've probably already made some comments to one of the questions, but you can elaborate some more. It's a two-part question, so I'm going to give it to you all. If you need me to ask it again, just let me know. So it's great to hear that the progress of the police reform bill is moving forward. You can't pass reforms without addressing the underlying issues. What is the proposed accountability when the commanders embrace the reform, but those officers policing our communities do not? And then, what metrics are used by your department to determine your effectiveness, and how do you share this information with the community? Over to you.
Thanks for the question. It's important to, we in policing are tasked with, dealing with crime and also dealing with the perception of crime and how we do that. I think, and I may have mentioned this on the last panel, we're always looking for the sweet spot to where it's enough enforcement. People are happy with how much they see us and how much they don't. They're happy with our enforcement efforts, but that's a moving target, because if there's crime in your neighborhood, you live in a challenged community, there's violence or drug dealing or something of that nature, you want more police. In fact, this summer, a poll of African Americans said that 80% were happy with the amount of policing, or they wanted more. 20% wanted more. And, I think that just speaks to where people live and what their fear is. If they're afraid of gun violence in their community, which unfortunately is up 27%, violent crimes up 27% in Maryland. So we've seen a number of homicides. I have the numbers here somewhere, but they're up significantly over the course of the last few years. It's been a trend that is, unacceptable for us in policing. I think it's important that we look at the metrics, and I talked about IA Pro, where we see officers' complaints, their pursuits that they're involved in, the amount of work that they're doing. We also have to look at stuff through our crime analyst, which is data-driven policing, where you have somebody who's pulling up crime that's occurring in your jurisdiction, and you're deploying officers to where those areas are most active. One of the unfortunate things, and I'll speak from my previous thing, is I worked with a councilman who was he hated pedestrian involved collisions, so he always wanted us to do pedestrian enforcement. As a young police officer, as a middle police officer, as now I'm an old raggedy police officer, there's nothing I hate more than pedestrian enforcement, because telling a grown man or woman how they should cross the road is not what anybody wants to hear. And the area that we would always do that would be in the transit center, because that's where most of the accidents would occur. If you would go to the transit center, what you would see is a high number of African American people and Latinos using the bus. So anytime we did a detail like that, we would have a disparate impact. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to have that, or you don't want that, any group of people feeling that their police aren't legitimately concerned about their safety and doing things that are designed to help them. So if you do, a program like that, you always should start off with education. I mean, try and educate people to what, we're here because we want to keep you safe. We want to help you. We want to do this. This is why we're out here. Tell them we'll be out here next week doing, enforcement, writing tickets. Hopefully that will alter the behavior and keep everybody safe. But like I said, it's always a challenge for us to know what's the right level. And I think if I look back over the course of my career, in 1994, 1995, we were way too stat driven. Everybody wanted arrests, everybody wanted tickets. And, that's not the correct way to win folks over in your community. Enforcement is part of what we do. It should be part of what we do. We should try and alter bad behavior, but we shouldn't, we should measure things, and we do here, like community engagement efforts. We had an officer today receive an award because he adopted a family last Christmas time, and he's getting ready to do it again. So you have to recognize not only the enforcement actions, which we're always going to do. We're the police. we have to address, we're crime fighters. We have to, address crime. And part of that is making arrests. But there's other things that we can do. And this is where I probably disagree with Ms. Emanuel and Delegate Atterbury's. I thought the school resource program was a dynamite way to have officers interact with young kids in non-enforcement type actions to do it. And I had SROs, and when there was arrests, we would look at them. And if a child or teenager was dealing drugs or bringing a gun to school or a weapon to school, I want my officers to make an arrest. I want that, that's what they're there. That's part of what they're there for. But the other things they're there for is to do education, to have the students see them in that way, humanize the officer, humanize the students, and it's the contact theory. The more you're around somebody, I think the more you like them. I mean, if we come together and we do this every week, I think you'll see more and more of us would form, friend groups and do things like that. And time-wise, probably not possible, but the more you have contact with people, the more you find the things that don't separate or divide you, but the things that you like about those people. So I'm a huge fan of non-enforcement type contacts. And for accountability, everything should be transparent. All those numbers you should put out a yearly use of force report. If you look at, it's very similar numbers, both for my current department and my last department. We only use force in 2% of our arrest cases. And I think that would surprise a lot of people that, most arrests are, I ask somebody, put your hands behind their back, and they comply. And that's the end of it. It's not, there's no force done. So I think I might be running over time, so I'll stop.
But no, thank you, Deputy Chief Polinsky, for your perspective. I see Miss Emanuel's eyes getting real big. And she wants to say something. And Miss Emanuel, the next question is for you. So if you want to tie in maybe your, a rebuttal or response in this question, that might help. We talked about recruitment a little while ago. So, and we're hearing much about the lack of diversity in the workplace, all across the board, but we have white officers and Black victims many times. So when it comes to reform, what message are we sending when most officers do not look like those who live in our communities? And would you say policing is different across socioeconomic communities? Over to you.
So first, I would honestly just say that it really rarely matters about whether or not the officer is white or Black, and whether or not the victim is brutalized or not. Most of the times the victim is Black, it doesn't really matter whether or not the officer is Black or white. That incident still occurs. And an example of this is what happened to William Green. The officer who killed him was an African-American officer. William was handcuffed behind his back in a front seat of police cruiser and shot over 7 times. So I don't think that determines whether or not they're going to use force. It's part of the culture, and it's part of the fact that policing in this country did start from slave patrols. So that is part of what has been ingrained and is systemically where their roots are. It's about controlling populations, particularly Black populations, and about social control. So that is where it is stemming from. So it is not a surprise when this violence occurs. It is part of literally their culture. And when good officers do speak out and do try to do something about this, they are retaliated against, or there's frivolous complaints filed against them internally, and they're unfairly punished, which is what we saw through our office's lawsuit against the Prince George's County Police Department, was Black and brown officers being unfairly targeted and retaliated for speaking out. And when we talk about Black people getting killed across the board, class is less of an issue. But, and we see that, for example, with what happened to Prince Jones, again, from Prince George's County. He was well-educated, came from a wealthy family, and was still killed. But when we talk about the kind of everyday police brutality instances, or just over policing, that definitely shows up more in lower socioeconomic areas. And a report that was done by actually one of my mentors, Jonathan Hutto, details that specifically in Prince George's County. From I think was from the 90s to the early 2000s, Prince George's County was known for was known for police shootings and killings, more citizens per officer than any of the 50 largest cities and county law enforcement agencies in the entire country. 84% of whom were Black, and there were at least 147 people shot during the 1990s alone. And the most egregious police behavior was concentrated in older areas inside the Beltway, including Capitol Heights, Fairmount Heights, Forestville, Suitland, Langley Park, and Hydesville. And it's something that we're still seeing today. So absolutely, the everyday aggressive interactions do happen in some of these lower socioeconomic areas. But again, class alone is not going to, being in a higher class or upper class is not going to protect you from police violence.
You make a good point, Ms. Emanuel. Thank you for your perspective. So
I add one more thing about the SROs, I'm sorry, is that 7% of school arrests are for disrupting the classroom, not any real crime. So I think it's unfair to say that having police in schools actually makes students feel safer, especially when they're going online or going home and watching TV and seeing another Black person was unarmed and killed at the hands of the police officers, and then going to school and seeing one. I don't think that makes them feel closer to police officers in those interactions, especially when they're being criminalized or punished for everyday children behavior. I don't think that's the outcome that we get.
Thank you so much. I feel like we could have one whole session on that topic, but we appreciate both perspectives. So Delegate Atterbury, what system has or will the state's attorney office put into place for citizens to access the disciplinary records of an officer?
So the disciplinary records, if you want to request them, you actually make the request, the information request to the police department. And then the police department should hand them over unless they have a very good reason for not handing them over, like it's part of an ongoing investigation, or they can redact certain things from it. But that request is actually made to the police department and not the state's attorney's office. And can I just make a quick comment about SROs as well? And my comment, you have to pardon me, is going to be focused on Howard County. As Ms. Emanuel stated, I represent Howard County and I had a local bill. And the reason why I did that is because we saw here, particularly in Howard County, that the arrests by SROs were predominantly African-American students. I mean, this was increasingly disproportional. African-Americans and students with disabilities, which are disproportionately African-American students. And so then those individuals are arrested, and folks want to say, oh, it's a paper arrest, it doesn't go anywhere. No, those kids are in the juvenile system, and then it's hard to actually get out of that juvenile system, or you don't until you're 21, in fact. And then we also saw that information by SROs was being used for no-knock warrants. Students were being followed home. And then also in Howard County, not only did we have SROs, we also had essentially security officers. And I have to say, I'm of the age where we didn't have either when I was in high school out here in Howard County. And we managed to do just fine. So I think it is absolutely something that needs to be addressed. There were town halls and all types of group conversations out here in Howard County, and students said, we don't feel comfortable when we see the officers. So I think the argument that Deputy Chief said is that when students of color see an officer every single day, that relationship isn't necessarily going to get better. I do think mentorship programs, you can certainly have mentorship programs with police departments and individuals that are in the school systems. But when you have memorandums of understandings between police departments and the school where their function is to police the schools, then that's a problem. And like Ms. Emanuel said, students are being criminalized for behavior that children do, and then they get a record. So I absolutely think it's a problem. I think it's a problem as a legislator, and I think it's a problem as a mother raising 3 Black children in the school system.
Thank you for making those points. I could definitely relate. So, all right, so we have some questions waiting in the Q&A, but we have one additional panelist question. So Delegate Atterbury or Ms. Emmanuel, I'm going to read the question and let me know who wants to take it. HB 670 did repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. However, it does not go into place until July 2022. According to the bill, each county in Maryland must establish a police accountability board. What are some of the things that could delay the implementation of the new disciplinary rules and procedures even later than July 2022?
Well, I will just say, I hope nothing. The statute says that they have to be implemented by a certain date, and so the jurisdictions need to heed that. Or I do think that there will be perhaps some repercussions for the different jurisdictions, and maybe that's something that the legislature has to take a look at. I also sit on the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, and I can tell you that these things are already being discussed by the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, which is now kind of the oversight body. Before it was just kind of a policy body, but now they are really working to make sure that the new legislation is being implemented in the different police departments. So I do know that for a fact. And I do know certain jurisdictions have already started undertaking figuring out how to comprise the police accountability boards. It was mentioned that Prince George's County had one. It wasn't effective. We had one in Howard County. I had no idea because that's how effective it was. But so now the legislation gives some deadlines, and I think the local jurisdictions are taking a look at the county councils, the city, to see what they need to do to implement it. And there's that time lag so that they can pass legislation, create a framework, and get that underway.
And if I could just add to that, some of the things that we are seeing is with I think it makes sense why the date was there was delayed implementation for some aspects of the bill. But what we're seeing, especially with the preemption language that's in HB 670, that essentially prohibits departments from including discipline in their collective bargaining agreements, because that has been delayed. The issue that we've been seeing is jurisdictions like Baltimore County, for example, that have entered new collective bargaining agreements with some of these LEA board provisions. So they still maintain the current makeup of the trial board. They've included expungement provisions in that CBA and other things dealing with discipline that kind of run interference with what are the new mandates in HB 670. And then that collective bargaining agreement won't expire until 2023. Which we can't do anything about until it expires. So HB 670 won't necessarily affect that county, except they will technically still have to create a police accountability board, but their discipline structure is going to look a little different. Montgomery County entered a new CBA right before session, and so they'll still create a police accountability board, but it only apply to the municipalities that aren't subject to the CBA, whereas the county police officers are subject to that CBA, so they'll have a different process that they're going to. So some of what we've been doing is trying to monitor collective bargaining agreements throughout the state to try to raise and flag this for the councils and the county executives so that they're aware of this concern and are keeping an eye out for those provisions. Baltimore City right now is renegotiating their CBA, and that's something we're monitoring. And the last thing that I will mention is with the police accountability boards, like we mentioned, what's happening in Calvert County, we're actively having to organize and mobilize people there to reject the county's proposal to add all these police officers, military, and background checks, and all these other barriers that would exclude real community and impacted folks from serving on these boards. And that's the kind of support that especially a lot of these remote jurisdictions are going to need help with. And we're hoping that we can work with the members of the General Assembly to kind of reinforce and make sure that this isn't happening. So that's the issues that we're seeing, but we're actively monitoring and trying to work on.
Thank you, Ms. Emmanuel. Deputy Chief Polinsky, we're going to pivot to the audience, but did you want to make a comment quickly in reference to, I don't want to rush you because we still have time, but like in reference to what Delegate Atterbury or Ms. Emmanuel talked about?
No, I think they addressed the accountability boards. I spoke that I'm in favor of non-pro police, non-anti-police boards, and if officers are getting a fair hearing, that's good. I think one of the negatives of dropping the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights is from a manager's perspective is that allowed us to compel statements from officers. Officers are still entitled to, the protections provided by the Constitution of the United States. And I'm sure, Ms. Emanuel would support that they have a Fifth Amendment right not to speak and all that. The Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights did allow me as a manager to order somebody to speak about a discipline matter. And when that goes away, that'll be a bridge we have to deal with as managers. That will be a difficulty in interviewing officers.
I just would like to say that we put new accountability measures in, and a couple of the things that we did do, even though we repealed the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, an officer can be compelled to make a statement, an officer can be compelled to undergo a polygraph, and an officer can be compelled to undergo a blood test.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we are going to open the floor up to our audience. We really appreciate our audience standing by and listening to this robust conversation. So let's see what questions we have out there in our virtual world. Mona, would you like to start with questions that we have from Facebook?
Sure. We have two questions, and they may have already been answered in one way or the other, but I'll read them, and if you want to elaborate, feel free. The first question is for Deputy Chief. What accountability has been expected of officers to continue training programs, as this seems to be a growing concern with the community and its local leaders?
Well, Maryland requires a certain number of training by officers at the entry level and for incumbents each year. The bare minimum an officer has to do is 18 hours. When you think about 18 hours, that's very small. I mean, a high school football team practices more than 18 hours a week to prepare for their game on the weekend. So, and what we do is much more important than a high school football game. I mean, we're going to go into situations where, lives are going to be impacted in significant ways on some of these high intensity calls. I'm a big fan of training. I think training you should expose your officers to stressful training. You should, inoculate them because people tend to make bad decisions in stressful situations. So if we can inoculate them to that and have them face a number of these incidents in training and scenario based where, there is a consequence for bad action and all that. But training is important on a variety of levels. Every year we come up with a training program. That's something that I would sit down with the chief. We sit down with the director of internal affairs. We sit down with the executive staff and say, where are our officers getting in trouble? Where are they doing things wrong? Where is the performance not that? And we come up with a plan that tries to address it. So this year, for example, we noticed a lot of our officers, and this is where most officers get into problems, is they just say something smart or they lose their patience and temper. And so we came up with a class of dealing with a difficult person. During that, they get, we show them examples, videotapes from a number of officer encounters that didn't go the way most police leadership or residents would want. And then the truth is, in the body camera era is, you're going to see how your officers perform and you're going to make judgments on them. And if you're a state's attorney, you're going to see the good and the bad, and that's going to make their job more difficult. So I think that police, we recognize we have to hold our officers accountable, but we in the policing field also want the entire criminal justice system held accountable. So we think it's something that we should go in it together and review the whole thing and look at, why are a small number of violent offenders allowed to commit crimes again, and again, and do such harm to society? I would challenge each one of you, every time you see a murder victim or a murder suspect's name, go to Maryland's case search and look at their criminal history. It's an open source thing where you're as a resident, you have the right to that transparency. Look at the records of those people involved and say, where could our system have been better? How many times had that person been arrested? What were the consequences for these violent crimes they committed? And why were they out on the street able to do harm again? So I'm all for holding officers accountable, but I think that we should hold the whole entire system accountable.
Thank you. The second question, I believe, is addressed to you as well. So much of the concern with policing stems from lack of trust. What are some best practices to increase the level of trust police officers have of the community members they police?
Trust is important, and I've said it before. You'll hear me say it all the time. It's from one of my mentors: "Is the communities that trust us the least need us the most." That wasn't me, was it? But the communities that trust us the least, they need us the most. And you as police, and this is not just the chief, and it's not just to check a block. You have to be engaged with all members of your community, because eventually you are going to have an incident that's either questionable or bad, or involving deadly force. All those are traumatic to a community. And your community outreach has to be relentless. You have to be, just for example, the last few weekends, we've been at St. Mark's United Methodist Church, African-American congregation. We had a great service fellowship, and then we go out in the parking lot and have coffee, and we let them talk to us, ask questions. We try and be open. If they have concerns or things that they want from the police department, we will meet those. At that event, we agreed to have a subsequent follow-up, a cleanup of the Grove here in Laurel, which is a predominantly African-American neighborhood, and we're excited to partner with that church and do that. We do that with other groups in the city, and our desire is to build friends and allies, and again, use that contact theory so that people are having contact with us. They see us as, I think, who we are, not just the person who's going to give you a ticket for running through a stop sign, but people who are invested in the community, who are part of the community, and who want this community to be safe. Because the more, there's here in Laurel 65 officers, but we have 28,000 residents. So those 28,000 eyes working, with us, we become a much safer community. And I used to be the director of the training academy in Montgomery County, and we would run a citizens academy. And one of the first questions I would always ask those groups is, what's more important, officer safety or citizen safety? The citizens would always say citizen safety, because you have a gun, you have a vest, there. When new recruits would come in, one of the first things I would ask, what's more important, citizen safety or officer safety? And these new recruits would say officer safety, because there's only 65 of us. So there's only 1,300 of us in Montgomery County. And I would say you're both right and you're both wrong. But that safety is contingent upon both groups being safe. If your police officers are safe, they're going to perform better. They're going to do better. If your residents are safe, you're going to have a safer community that performs better, and your officers are going to perform better. It's a symbiotic relationship where we rely on each other. And if one group is demonizing the other or viewing them as another and not part of the community, that's destructive. And we need each other. So that's what I believe.
Thank you. Ms. Emanuel, did you want to answer the question as well?
I sure did. So a couple of things. As both a Black woman and an advocate and a student of history, I'll just say that community oversight is what will help establish that trust. And that is the reason why that has been the demand. If I know that if I've been victimized or my neighbor's been victimized, that I know that my community board will hold that officer accountable, I might then trust the police that are governing my community. But that is not the case right now. And so without that accountability, there will never be that trust. And I also just want to quote a finding from the Commission to Restore Trust in Policing that the Mayor and General Assembly actually helped develop, and that is that the people who that in the Commission found that from a survey conducted of 5,000 Baltimore City residents, a majority of the persons interviewed lacked trust and confidence in BPD, feeling that BPD does not have a good relationship with the community and does not serve the community. And the survey found little variation in the view based on race, gender, age, income, homeless status, or education level of the person interviewed. Most of the persons interviewed were willing to call BPD, but only if someone actually used physical force against them, and that most of the respondents actually have witnessed police officers brutalize people in their community, which is why they were less reluctant to work with them or talk to them unless it was absolutely necessary. So oftentimes police accountability and public safety are, people paint them as if they're at odds, when often, when in reality, they actually go hand in hand. Those communities that are experiencing extreme violence do want to address that violence, but at the same time, those are the same communities that are also being over policed and suffering violence from those same entities that they're supposed to call for help. And so if we are able to establish that trust and have that transparency, more people in the community be willing to work with officers, then officers will be able to really identify the real drivers of violence in the community with that community support. But that is, again, not the case because that trust is not there.
Thank you. That was the last question in Facebook.
Thank you so much. Julie, are there any questions over in our Zoom platform?
Yes, we have several. And
All right,
the
over to
first
you.
one is, during the first panel discussion, there was recognition that many calls for police assistance involves people with mental health challenges. What progress has been made to properly handle those issues?
I'll jump in here first. I will say, quite frankly, during the past legislative session, we did not make progress on that specific issue. I think there was hope that we would, but so much went into what we did pass. I do know that when it comes to police response to individuals that suffer from mental health challenges or disabilities, is a problem. There are certain regional hospitals like LifeBridge, Johns Hopkins, one other, but they're focused in Howard County, Baltimore City, and Baltimore County, and they have collectively, without government support, put in, certain millions of dollars to try to address that problem and partner with communities. There are to respond to those types of calls. Montgomery County has a pilot program to address those types of calls, and Howard County has a mobile crisis unit, grassroots, that goes out with an officer. However, unfortunately, it's not a 24-hour, and I don't think it operates on the weekends because these things require funds. And so there are several models out there. What we have been talking kind of offline, but there hasn't been legislation in the General Assembly, is, some folks think that, okay, if a 911 caller can identify such a type of call, then you can send out someone, not a police officer, but someone, a health expert, or someone to address the mental health individual. I don't know if that's right, because then you don't want something to happen to that person if there is some sort of violent interaction. So there's a co-response where you have the police officer and someone from a crisis team go out and respond to an individual. We had a situation recently here in Howard County that I was helping to try to address and bring parties together to address, where an African-American male, he is in his mid-20s. He has the IQ of a fourth grader. He has bipolar and some other issues. And if you talk to him, that he has some challenges. And the police stopped him, and it did not go well for him, unfortunately. And then he ended up being charged with some crimes when he shouldn't have been. He signed some papers, which couldn't understand what they were. And so these are challenges that we have to address. We have to address them at the statewide level. I know different jurisdictions are addressing them, but we are, I'm not sure if it's going to be in this upcoming session, but I know there is an appetite to look at it from a statewide perspective.
From the police perspective, we'd love, therapists or mental health specialists available 24 hours, 7 days a week to do it. I just don't know if there's the money to do that. I don't think that, even if you look at the pilot programs that are, launched, or some of the ones that are doing it, they're frequently what you're going to see as a joint response, because oftentimes these calls don't go out as mental health calls. You might go, somebody breaking your window in your car, in your car or your house. It's going to go out as a burglary or somebody trying to steal your auto. And that person might be suffering from a mental health issue. And we're not going to know that till we go. And, if the call went out as a burglary, you wouldn't dispatch a therapist or a social worker. And, from the police side, I work with therapists or social workers. And when I did sex crimes investigations, is I wouldn't want those young men, young women going out, untrained or prepared to defend themselves in situations that sometimes just rapidly deteriorate. And especially with people who are, extreme drug intoxication or excited delirium or things like that. When the police, our goal in dealing with someone like that is getting them into custody as quickly as we can so we can get them to the hospital and treat them. And if a gentleman was charged in Howard County, I don't think that's appropriate. I think that, the goal is you want to get them the medical treatment that they clearly need. And, very few doctors are going to come out and treat somebody naked in the street, punching out a window under, the influence of PCP. And sometimes we as the police, that's what we have to deal with. And we can't I don't think we'll ever give that to somebody else, that it's going to be us that go there, put that person in custody and get them the medical help they need. And sometimes cases like that they never look good on body worn camera. It's violent. It's something that no officer wants to go wrestle that, naked person in the middle of the street covered in blood. But it's what we do. And, it's not the call that you want to run, but, sometimes your number's up and you have to go run that call.
The next question. The deputy chief brought up a great point of how the police force as a whole has been demonized in the eyes of citizens. Because of this, I understand recruitment from the community is difficult, especially within the county. What kinds of community outreach has been implemented to try and mend the issue?
Well, we're always trying different things. We run ads here locally inside the city at our gyms. We still have the DARE program. I know some agencies have went away from that. It is an officer in the school, so I don't want to upset the other two panelists. But we have a wonderful officer, Karina Jackson. She happens to be a Black female. That's one of our least represented demographics on the police department. So we think that she's a great ambassador for us. We'd like to get her talking to the kids at an age where it's important, because sometimes in college, young men and women are making decisions that preclude them from being in the police department. And like, we'd like to catch them, show not only, like, we get the people that apply who want to be on the SWAT team and, want to, drive cars fast and all that. But one of the things that we haven't done very well in the past is sell our service side and our ability to go in and change people's lives. We worked with Linda Thornton Thomas, the president of the Prince George's County NAACP. She's got a program where she wants to introduce kids to law enforcement officers, and we were the first police department to partner with her on that. I proofread her program. We're looking forward to the end of COVID, where we can take some more forward steps to get that going on. We expanded our recruitment effort. Not only in the city, we want homegrown talent, but it is tough to recruit, and we'll deal with it. We'll get our officers and we'll serve. But sometimes I do think it's counterproductive to demonize any group of people. You should judge individuals by their behavior and the behavior of that person or all that. When you cite the statistics from Baltimore City, that pains my heart. Like if you walked around the city of Laurel with me, and I'm relatively new here, or Montgomery County, I think that I could show you or introduce you to the relationships I've made, the people that not only trust me as an individual, but trust me as the commander over there and trust me as the deputy chief here. And again, I'll repeat myself, but that's got to be relentless and constant. And you've got to truly care about policing and truly care about your community.
I will add that Montgomery County right now is leading the state in police killings in the last year. So I've lived here for 20 plus years. So I think our experiences have been very, very different. But I will add that I think go back to my earlier point, what will help with that, maybe even recruitment, but also that trust, is actually that accountability piece. There's a lot of what we're hearing and seeing internally with Black officers being retaliated against and for trying to do the right thing. And so as long as that continues, and that's an internal problem, until those internal issues are also fixed, I think that recruitment will continue to be a problem, or the department will continue to see more Black and brown officers leave the force.
I would just like to add that I think from the legislative perspective, from what I spoke about earlier in terms of the loans and the scholarships, we were hoping that that would be a tool that departments could use for recruitment. I personally think it's a problem that we have officers policing our communities that don't live here and can't afford to live in certain jurisdictions. You get stopped and the officer lives in Pennsylvania. I think that's a huge problem. Our officers should be able to live in our communities. That makes them part of the community. When you go to your local Harris Teeter or Giant or whatnot, you should be able to say, hey, Deputy Chief, how are you? How are your kids? That should be how the community works. I do also want to just say that from the point of the legislature, I had the honor of chairing the Police Reform and Accountability Work Group that the speaker put together. It was a bipartisan work group right after the murder of George Floyd. And we did not come from a perspective of demonizing the police. I mean, quite frankly, my 93-year-old grandmother, who is a soror, is a retired sheriff out of Detroit, Michigan. And on the same token, I am an African-American mother of raising 3 Black children. So I think all of that together is kind of the perspective that I personally came from. It wasn't from a perspective of demonizing the police. Like it was mentioned, we need officers. We need good officers. If something happens, I want to be able to call the police with confidence, not what is going to happen when they come and worry about how I'm going to be treated. And so this is the start, I think, of the legislation that was passed, is the beginning of a work in progress to change the culture, a work in progress to root out officers who do have implicit bias, because we have those officers, to root out the bad officers and to retain and recruit good officers who do want to treat people of color with dignity. So I think that is the perspective that the majority of the legislature came from, that supported the legislation.
The next question has 2 parts. The first is, how can you address the well-being of an officer after a traumatic event? And then how can you develop officer training programs that reflect your community values and build trust between police officers and the communities they serve?
Well, the reality of it is officers are going to go through traumatic incidents during the course of their career. We anticipated this session that there was going to be a requirement to have some sort of mental health treatment for police officers, like mandatory for the year. And I don't know if that ended up being passed or not or required, but we thought it was a great idea. And we went to our mayor and he said, fantastic. He supported it. And, we think that should be available. If you're going to ask folks to go out and do, put themselves into harm's way or witness, some of these traumatic incidents. And I said, the number that we're going to see over the course of our lifetime is higher. I can tell you all, I have some level of post-traumatic stress. This is the time of year where, I always notice it. I was, the commander of the Germantown station, and there was a homicide in Germantown. And it was Christmas time, and the victim was a young Latino girl, and she was wearing Christmas leggings. I don't even remember what the design of those leggings were now, but every time, I see people in Christmas leggings, my mind goes back to that homicide scene. And unfortunately, my daughter has 2 pairs of Christmas leggings. And, as December comes every year, it's a thing I don't talk about at home, but I'll hide those leggings. Like, we'll do the laundry and I'll hide them because I don't want to see them again. But we do. So I know that some of the things I've seen have impacted me. And I'm not, afraid to tell you guys that. I think that, when you look at, and see just evil, that it does impact you and makes you question, how can humans treat each other this way? And but having these programs, having the availability for people to talk to and talk things out and get treatment, get a break, get all that, and not be judged by their fellow officers. And what I will say is, when I was a younger officer, it was very frowned upon for you to seek mental health, or they would have taken your badge and gun. But now I think when we see the high number of police officer suicides and things like that, that we've gotten better at saying, hey, our folks need this. And if we want to talk about, not only protecting the public, but protecting officers, this is something that we have to do. So I was very happy with the mayor and the council here supporting that, funding that. And I think every police department should do it. It's also nice to have, and there's a number of them across the country, is peer support lines for officers. And we have the numbers up all around the station. If you're down in our roll call room or the locker room, there's numbers that you can call and just talk to a police officer about either something you saw or something you're going through, argument you're having at home with your spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And you're talking to another police officer who is, probably going through similar things and has been trained to talk to you about your life and things like that. So I do think mental health for everybody's important. It's, important for us as police officers too. We have, can't pretend like we're immune to all the things that we see.
If I could just add for perspective, because you mentioned PTSD, and I think earlier you made a comment about how a lot of folks discussing policing sounds like it's demonizing, when in fact a lot of folks, I think, are suffering from PTSD, similar to what you just described, both from incidents that they've seen in their community of their neighbors being killed, or just over policing and brutality that they've experienced themselves. And that also factors into the interactions when they do see a police officer and somebody might run. It's not because they're committing a crime, it's because they're genuinely afraid for their life. And so I just wanted to offer that perspective, that it goes both ways, and that PTSD is definitely present and has been for centuries in the Black community as well.
No, I agree. I think that the police officers share that with, in some of the challenged communities, that if you are seeing, people, shot on a nightly basis, that you're going to have those same numbers that we do. And, I empathize with folks that are living in a neighborhood like that. That's why I've done this job for 27 years now, is I want to make it better for them. If you just look at the last 2 weekends here in the state, there've been 47 shootings and 19 homicides. That's in the last 2 weekends here in Maryland. And, the high proportion of those are African-American males, and none of them were shot by police officers.
The next question is for Delegate Atterbury. And the question is, do you think that quote unquote funding police/community activities would help build the relationship necessary to help heal the wounds of police and African-American experiences?
So I think the question is would funding police departments to interact with the communities help repair those relationships? I certainly think that some of the things that the deputy chief mentioned, like what his department did with the church, I think intentional acts like that will help start to repair. And for instance, I know in Camden, New Jersey, that's what they did. And I brought this up, didn't go over so well, but requiring police departments to do intentional acts like that. And it may get to that point if police departments don't start doing that, but that's what is going to need to be done in terms of community policing, so that the officers in your community, as well as the officers actually living in the community. I think the larger picture is the funds need to go to, workforce programs, apprenticeship programs, reentry programs, education programs in our underserved communities, instead of always resorting to legislation or lobbying to lock individuals up, because you're going to have the same issues if you don't help underserved communities lift themselves up out of their situation and be able to take care of themselves. Then those individuals are always going to be in that situation. And so the legislature did do that, funded programs, specifically in the city, like Safe Streets, to help communities. The governor continues to veto those programs. The governor continues to push for incarcerating individuals, which is not the solution. The legislature did pass a couple sessions ago, for repeat violent offenders using a firearm. We did pass legislation to incarcerate those individuals, recognizing that those individuals are a danger to society. But until we start putting money as a state into communities that are underserved, so that individuals can become productive members of society, can get better educated, can get the proper health care, and can take care of themselves, and can get trained in jobs and have actual opportunities, then we are going to have crimes of violence. We're not going to be able to solve the problem of police, quite frankly, in my opinion, interacting with the communities, and we're not going to be able to solve that problem.
And the final question is for Deputy Chief Plazinski. And the question is, how often do officers go through sensitivity trainings, and are they assessed for possible individual therapy if needed?
We do mandatory. Our programs could be mandatory, and like, you can't force somebody to speak to a therapist. But so if I wanted to go in and I just didn't want to talk to somebody, I could sit in a chair for an hour. But how unlikely would that be? Even somebody that you disagree with. Maybe I invite Miss Emanuel out for coffee. And, we're not going to line up on everything politically, but I don't think that we're going to sit at a table and not talk to each other. So if we can get that officer in there and have an hour, they can have an hour and they could talk. And then we built into our program that what we know is going to be there. Some officers who need more than an hour. So they're going to go in there. Maybe that hour is what you need. You can get a few things off your chest. You can move on. That therapist can make an assessment. They're not going to be able to report back that, hey, this person is this or this person's that, based on, its medical information. But, they can encourage that person to get additional help. And I think a lot of times just getting people into the doors a step in the right direction. We do have, and I mentioned earlier before, the red flag programs that we're looking at, where we might pick up on something where an officer's has 2 or 3 complaints in a short period of time, and then we could start looking at the body worn camera and see how they're interacting with folks, and we have an expectation that they are going to treat them with dignity and respect, and if they're not, we're going to discipline them, and that discipline will be progressive. It could be up until termination.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, audience. Those were great questions, relevant, and it just brought out so much more information and education from our panelists. So right now, I want to say thank you to Delegate Atterbury, thank you to Ms. Emanuel, and thank you to Deputy Chief Plazinski for sharing your time with us. We know your time is, extremely tight, and we thank you that you chose to be with us tonight to inform us, to educate us, and to keep the message going that we still have work to do. So a call to action also. So at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to our Vice President and Program Chair, Ms. Sandra Yates, to close us out. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Sandra Yates.
Thank you, Ms. Moten Jones, for facilitating this engaging conversation this evening. Good evening, everyone. I am Sandra Yates, First Vice President and Program Chairman for Psi Epsilon Omega Chapter. And on behalf of PEO and the Pearl Elegance Foundation, I want to also extend our sincere thanks to and gratitude to Ms. Emmanuel Delegate Atterbury and Deputy Chief Plazinski for joining us tonight for this important and impactful discussion about policing in our local communities. We would also like to virtually present you with the certificates of appreciation for you sharing your time with us to give us updates about police reform actions in Maryland. Thank you so much. I also want to extend a special thank you to each of our guests who joined the webinar this evening. We hope that what you heard tonight will encourage you to get engaged in conversation about the policing you want to see in your community. We have the power to determine the policing and policies we want through advocacy like Ms. Emanuel, or through the legislative process like Delegate Atterbury, or by walking the beat like Deputy Chief Plazinski and listening to the community. We have the power to be and make the change that we want to see. So make your voice heard. There are multiple ways to determine policing in our local communities, but we must take action. Finally, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our amazing PEO Special Advocacy Committee, chaired by Ms. Nicola Kennedy and co-chaired by Ms. Lauren Moten Jones, for planning and leading our event tonight. And I am forever grateful to each committee member, whether you were in front or behind the scenes. Thank you so much. Before we sign off this evening, please take a moment to fill out the brief poll that was dropped into the chat. We really need your feedback so that we can bring conversations to the community and address the issues that you want to be heard. Thank you again for completing the poll and for joining Psi Epsilon Omega Chapter and the Pearl Elegance Foundation tonight. For more information about our programs and service, please check our website, www.aka-peo.org, and follow us on our social media platforms. Good night and stay safe. Thank you.